He wanted to walk home alone. The sickness was breaking out all over him, and he knew what it was. It had been there all the time, but Gertrude had made him face it. She had said what it was natural for other people to think. He had been going along pretending that what he wanted to happen really could happen, though he had known within him, that every day that passed made it more far away and improbable. Now the limit had been reached. It was impossible for him to become a minister. He knew it. Probably it had been impossible all along. He alone had believed it could be done. His mother had pretended to live. When he talked about it, she kissed him and hugged him and said, "I hope all your dreams will come true." But he could see now that her prayers were for a miracle, not for something that could happen naturally, even if everyone concerned tried his best. If his grandmother had halved, or his grandfather, it would have been accomplished. They would have mortgaged the farm to pay for the necessary schooling. His uncles were not that much interested, either in him or in preaching. They had families of their own, and his ambitions would have seemed to them, if he had approached them seriously, as a lot of foolishness. His father was extremely amiable about the idea, since he admired misters and men of learning almost as much as he did businessmen and politicians. But this amiability produced nothing specific in the way of money. There were 4 daughters in the family, and although business was sometimes good, business was also sometimes bad. He was 18 and a half. Suppose the miracle happened and he was able to begin school in the fall? He might get through high school in 3 years. He could sleep on There Is a River, some of the books. Others concerned matters which he to conquer while conscious, mathematics and grammar, for instance. They had to do with problems that had to be solved, not answers that had to be given. He would be enter in college at 21 and a half. He would be almost 26 before he entered a seminary. That was too old. By that time he ought to be married and have a family. He remembered now how Mr. Moody had said, "You may have to begin late," and then had said, "Keep the faith," and told him about the apostles being humble fishermen. Mr. Moody had seen that it was impossible. Everyone had seen it but himself. He had stopped growing up, in his own mind, when he determined to be a minister. Time from then on had ceased to affect him. He remained always a boy who wanted to go to school and study to be a preacher. Meanwhile his legs had stretched, his voice had changed, manhood had arrived and taken possession of his body. Now, suddenly, it had taken possession of the rest of him. He felt woefully old and discouraged. Life had passed him by, and he had not known it was moving. Now he was doomed to be a businessman, working in a store, wrapping packages for other people, going to church only on Sundays and meeting nights. Eventually he would own the store, probably, and teach SXM day school. When the girls were raised and married, he would build a house for his mother and father to live in. He would have with them, because by then he would be old too, and naturally he would never marry. He would just do good for people, and be nice to everyone. When Gertrude came into the store with her children, he would ask her about them and talk to them. Until she would turn away with tears in her eyes at the thought of the great love she had lost by not waiting for him. There is a river suddenly. Just as Cly lump in his throat seemed about either to choke him or burst, a voice in his head, a man's voice, like his own, said, very sarcastically, "Well, what better way is there for a man to serve God and his fellow man?" He stopped in his tracks. He could feel himself blushing. What better way, indeed, could a Christian live than by just such a life as he had outlined? And he had thought of it only because he was pitying himself. Pitying himself for losing the life of a minister with a rich congregation, a fine house, and a beautiful wife and children. A true preacher would be a missionary and own nothing but his Bible. He walked on rapidly, still blushing. When a carriage with some of the guests from the party overtook him, he was glad to accept the offer of a ride. Sitting backward, with his feet swinging out into Cly night, and his eyes fixed on the sky, he puffed at his pipe and was no longer sorry for himself. He was going to give up the idea of being a minister. He had to. But he wasn't going to give up Gertrude. He was going to marry her. Time found it easy to weave years into the fabric of Hopkinsville. There was never any change in the pattern. The same streets and buildings were to be covered with snow during winter, dusted with wind in March, cleansed with rain in April and May, and baked during the long, bright days of summer. The winters were cold, the springs wet, the summers hot. And the autumn P.S. Gelnrins with soft air nd leaves turned yellow. W. Russet, M.D. to Edgar, who was in love and happy, the calendar and the earth were all that turned. His heart stood still, afraid to beat lest it tick away into memory the wonder of her feeling for him. That he loved her was not a source of happiness to him. It was a hunger which had constantly to be fed, and which could turn from ecstasy to torture if the supply of nourishment were cut off. Lef happy smiley was her loy. Iquel carrot that carrot on stanty lie. Thrilled him thati. Carroty did not tire of him, that she liked being with him, that of her own choice she chose his company. There is a river above anyone else's, was at times almost more than he could bear. All his life he had yearned for things that were beyond him. He had become used to dreams that never came true. He was like a boy who had idly wished for wings, and suddenly found himself flying through the air. He would be thinking about her as he worked carrot in the store, wrapping a package or putting some new books on the shelves, when it would strike him that she was probably at the same moment thinking of him. He would see her moving through the living room, picking up the book he had brought her to read. He would see her hand reach for the pages. He would follow the blood of her pulse up the slim arm to the clear, small face and the dark eyes, always so full of concern. He would look at the masses of hair piled on her head like a basket, and look down into her head, trying to see what thoughts of him were moving through it. His hands would tremble, his face would flush, and he would move quickly to do something that would take his whole strength. and help him to still the wild beating that came up from his heart and flowed out through every part of him. He would move his thoughts away from her then, for safety's sake. He would send them through the house in which she lived, pausing at each detail, taxing his memory to remember how it looked and what he had been told about it. It steadied him to do this. It made his mind work, while his heart, in the background, slowed down to a normal beat. Next to the parlor of the hill was the great hall, fronting on the porch, and larger than an ordinary room. In it were 2 large secretaries, one against each side wall. They were massive pieces of oak that reached to the saying. The upper part of each was shelved, with glass doors, the middle portion was a desk, the lower portion was shelved, with solid doors. Each desk had a lamp, and there was a large lamp. There is a river with a white shade, for reading. The shelves of the secretaries were filled with books. There were easy chairs scattered around for the library customers. He had not seen the bedrooms. There was one on the other side of the hall and 2 more between it and the rear of the house, but he had heard about the Middle one, which Aunt Kate shared with Gertrude's mother. There were 2 beds, of oak, and these beds had feather mat tresses. Aunt Kate had plucked the feathers for her mat tress. Lizzie, as Aunt Kate called her older sister, had plucked the feathers for her mattress. Each had done her own stuffing, sewing, and shaping. Every day they made up their beds, neither accepting assistance from the other. Each had her particular technique, and no one was allowed to touch either bed, for any purpose, except the owner. Each sister had a rocking chair. They were made of oak, with strong cane bottoms. As they moved about the house during the day, they took their chairs with them, carrying them out into the backyard in summer. The chairs were as sacred as the beds, but their sanctity was sometimes violated. The sisters were continually accusing each other of occupying the wrong rocker. In the rear of the house was the dining room. It had an enormous oak table that dwarfed all the other furniture. Sideboard, chairs, buffet. In one corner, fastened against the wall, was a large medicine chest, full of all sorts of patented drugs and home remedies. Aunt Kate constantly predicted that everyone in the house was going to be poisoned, because medicines for the cows, chickens, dogs, and human beings were all kept together in the chest, without even a differentiation of shelves to identify them. "I'll go in there some dark night and get the wrong thing," Aunt Kate would say, "and that will be the end of me." Then there was the back room, with its famous pot-bellied "there is a river" stove. Old Mrs. Salter was a strict Christian. She constantly lectured her sons on such evils as cards, dice, and liquor, and promised dire punishment if she ever discovered evidence that the boys were indulging in any of them. One winter day she found a pack of cards in Will's pocket. She called the family together, made a speech, and, opening the door of the stove, cast the cards into the flames. They were celluloid. The stove exploded, blowing off its door, tossing its HD into the air, and scattering fire over the room. No one was hurt, and the wandering firebrands were collected and extinguished. Mrs. Salter said nothing, But she seemed rather pleased. The explosion had somehow proved her point. He residents of the hill lived at peace with the world, and warred pleasantly among themselves. Sam Salter had established complete democracy in his home. ILC Ontro. Virtual subject were brought up at the Sisted that equal person present, FTVN THFT smorft ST chilj underscore caret. PRP. Underscore NT in pinion on underscore IT. He was contemptuous of anyone who agreed with anyone else. Each person was an individual, he thought, and ought to differ with every other individual, however slightly, in all things. As an architect he believed all bricks should be the same size. As a man he believed all human beings should differ. Thus Kate and her sister Lizzie lived harmoniously to get her without agreeing on a single thing. Kate looked after the animals, the cows, chickens, horses, and dogs. Lizzie looked after the plant life, the flower gardens and the orchard. Lizzie read omnivorously, preferring biographies and political treatises. Kate read the local newspaper each day, specializing in the social notes, births, deaths, and marriages. Lizzie was interested in politics and knew every office holder in the community and state, either personally or by correspondence. Kate was interested in the social movements of There Is a River.